Now, the nice thing about these functions is that it's really easy to use them even when you're trying to create more than one identifier column in your data. So let's try a trickier example from, this is a data set from Danielle Navarro's lab. So I have a CSV in my data folder called frames wide. Let's read that one in. So we're going to call this frames wide, and we'll tell that we want to use the read CSV, and the data lives here in my data folder, and the file is called frames wide. All right, so we've got this new thing called frames wide. And you can see that here we have some information about participant ID and gender and age and what condition they were run in. And then we have all of these wide columns that contain information about more than one thing. So these are participants' scores for each combination of the condition of how big the item is and the item number. So participants saw items that were large and medium and small, and within each of those categories they saw 7 individual exemplars, right? So ideally what we want is a single column that has everybody's responses in it, and then 2 columns, one that has what size the item was and the other that has the item number, right? You can do this in one step using pivot longer. So let me show you how. So we've got this frames wide, and we want to make a new data frame called frames long. We're going to start by taking the frames wide data and piping it into pivot longer. So just as we did with the beaches, we want it to tell R what the names of the variables that will contain what is currently the names of the columns, the name of the single column, or in this case 2, that is going to contain those names. And so in this case, what we can do is say that we want to create 2 columns, one that is called size, whoops, bad typing, and one that is called item, right? So we want to capture information both about, where did that go? Both about the size, as we want information about the size to be in one column, small, medium, and large, and information about the item number, that is item 1 through 7, to be in a different column. So we say we're going to we want the names to go to 2 columns, one of them called size and one of them called item. And then we want the values, whoops, bad typing today, values to go to a different column. This column we want to call response. And we want to tell it what the range of columns that we want it to, the range of columns that are currently wide, that we want them to make long. So often what I do to get a list of the variable names is use the names function in the console. And so we want to take the columns ranging from large item 1 here to small item 7. So we want it to make long from large item 1 to small item 7. All right, then we need to tell it one more piece of information. So we want it to create 2 columns out of the current variable names by splitting them. In this case, the separator is an underscore, right? So it may be that your separator is a dot or a dash or a gap. And so you just need to tell R where do you want to split the information about, in this case, the size of the item and the item number. In our case, it's an underscore. So we want to call this sep. Now, let me check. Sometimes if you go like this, Yeah, so if you put your cursor right near the start of the function name, there's usually this really useful little yellow pop-up just to make sure that I'm doing this argument correctly. So you see here, it says names sep is what I want. So I want names sep equals underscore. All right, let's give that a go. So we're telling it that we want it to create two columns. The names of the current variables are going to split into two columns, one called size and one called item. The values are going to go in a new column called response, and the variables that we want that are currently wide, that we want long, go from large item 1 to small item 7, and we want to separate the names based on the underscore in the current variable names. It hasn't found, what error in eval object frame wide not found. Okay, that's an easy fix. So see how here in our environment, I called the data frame frames with an S wide. So we've got to make sure that that matches perfectly. Let's try that again. There we go. So now we've got this new thing called frame. Let's make it consistent. We'll call this frames long as well. All right, there's this new thing called frames long. And you can see that has very smartly created two new columns that differentiate each response. One that is the size of the item, large, medium, small, and one that is the item number. Very, very cool. All right, so that's pivot longer and pivot wider, and pivot longer in a more tricky example. Good luck.